Good morning. I'm Sherry Breeson, and I'm founder of the Digging Deep Project, and we support the emotional health of young people through the power of self-expression through our digital tools, such as our game, Shadow's Edge, a free mobile game for teens and young adults, downloadable on the App Store and Google Play. One thing that I've learned throughout my whole project is it's really not easy being a teenager or a young adult today. The stressors of the world are mounting, COVID just being one example, but before that, the school shootings, just intense pressure that our young people are going through, the increasing suicide rate. You combine all these stressors with the fact that a lot of the, if not most of the major clinical psychological diagnoses start in the teen and young adult years. It's no surprise that we're in a mental health crisis, and it's no wonder why the American Psychological Association has said that nearly 75% of the teens that they interviewed could use more emotional support during the past year. So to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about, I thought I'd share a few quotes from the voice of the teens themselves before we introduce you to one of our teens. And I got these from a book called Just a Thought, which was produced by the teen board at Children's Health Council, who Ramsey Khasho's here, and he'll be talking to you about his expertise. But their panel put together a book for parents, educators, and their peers to tell them the world what it's like to be a teen who's dealing with mental illness. So listen to some of these so you can get a picture of what it's like for kids. A sinister that won't leave me alone. That's mental health issues for kids. I'm trapped down a well, yelling for help, but nobody can hear me. It's a daily battle with my own brain. And it's constantly raining, but I don't have an umbrella. So first we're going to turn to Lena Kalotihos, who's a high school senior in the San Francisco Bay Area school. And next we'll have Dr. Ramsey Khasho, the clinical director of Children's Health Council, followed by Dale Larson, who's a professor of counseling psychology at Santa Clara University. And finally, Annie King, managing director of SafeSpace, a local youth-serving mental health agency in Menlo Park. For some little housekeeping, we won't have time to take questions, but we do encourage you to use your Q&A button and send those to us, and we'll direct them to us, and you'll get your answer. And also, we'll be following up after the webinar with a resource page for you, which hopefully will be helpful. And we'll include our emails too, if you need to contact one of us for something. So in this webinar, we hope to shed some light on how we as a group can empower young people, not just to survive those teenage years, but actually to thrive. And if you think about it, there's a spectrum of emotional health, as I like to call it. On one side, the good side, let's say, is confidence and joy and feeling empowered to face those stressors, to have life balance. But then on the other side, you would have feeling disconnected from yourself and pretty much everyone, almost to the point of despair, and everything in between, from anxiety to obsessive compulsive disorder. So these are the type of things that our young people are facing. So we're very happy to start today with Lena. And could you share your personal story about, or actually, first I'm going to ask you just in general, why do you think it's such a difficult time for adolescents today?
Hi, so I think for me personally, being a teen in a first world country and being in the Bay Area as well, there's a lot of academic pressure because you're growing up around Stanford, around Berkeley, around Davis, around all these tech companies. And this isn't just Bay Area as well. I think it's any major city or urban area. So there's a lot of pressure to not only meet the standards, but to exceed the standards, which is not only supported through by your parents, by the schools. So there's a lot of academic pressure. And then being an adolescent as well, you're not only trying to find your path in life and what you want to do in the future, but you're trying to find yourself as well. And you're surrounded by, in high school, you're surrounded by all these people who are also trying to find themselves, and that's a large task.
That's kind of like the blind leading the blind, right? So I'm hoping that you're willing to share a part of your story. Would you be able to do that with the audience? There's nothing like hearing from the teen voice direct. And if you're willing, could you share a little bit about
Yeah,
your
of course. So my experience with mental health dates back to, so I'm a senior in high school right now, and my struggles with depression and anxiety first started in 8th grade. I was the kind of kid who always thought I could do it myself. I was very independent, which has its upsides and also its downsides. So I didn't really communicate to anyone because I thought I could do it all by myself, and I didn't want to be a burden. And you know, that stigma surrounding mental health where there's it's often seen as a weakness. So I kind of just powered through. I tried my best to do it on my own. Um, And I did that about until my sophomore year of high school when it all came to a tipping point. My sophomore year, I was sexually assaulted, and that was kind of like the boiling point for me. Um, so that's when I experienced my first hospitalization and then started receiving professional help with the support of my parents. And that's when I really started to learn the value of communication as well. Um, so I went through an intensive outpatient program, and I learned a lot. It was extremely difficult, but nonetheless very educational and rewarding. And it's still an ongoing journey, but I'm here right now, and I'm so happy to be able to share my experience with others and just be an ally and help anyone that I can.
Thank you so much for sharing that really touching story. Can you tell us what it was like at that point when you did reach out for help, and what was maybe helpful and maybe not so helpful? Because I think your insight could really help us in being more effective with other young people. Could you
Yeah.
share?
So nonetheless, it was really difficult to reach out for help. So difficult that at first I didn't even reach out for it. It was not until other people noticed that I really needed help when I started receiving it. But along the line of my treatment, I began to develop more robust communication skills and realized that reaching out for help is not a bad thing. It's actually like a really brave thing. And that began in like confiding in my parents, um, my some of my friends as well, my good friends that I knew I could trust, and I have one twin sister as well, so she's always been by my side. I'm not the best when it comes to communication, especially when it comes to like my own emotions or like personal struggles. So when I communicate, I tend to take a lot of time. I need time and space to really think about the words that I want to say. So usually I tell people if I'm going to communicate my like deeper emotions to them, just give me time and try not to be super judgmental. A listening ear is always good. Um, and as well as if they try and ask me for advice before giving me direct advice is very helpful as well. Um, so I would say the key is space, time, and kind of like a softer approach.
I think it's so important, and I hope everybody heard that, to just create the space. I mean, I think that sometimes our lives are so busy and we're running around like crazy, and we don't make this space to have real conversations. And that's personally one of my favorite things about COVID is slowing down enough to make that kind of space to have real conversations with people. So really, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious if you've done anything in the area of self-care and how you take care of yourself. Do you have any advice for us on that?
Yeah, so over my years, over my mental health journey, that's definitely been kind of a very like self-discovering path. So now I would say I'm pretty good at the self-care routine. My biggest thing is probably when I'm not able to communicate verbally or I'm just not ready to yet. I like to journal. I like to write a lot, whether that's writing about my own emotions or just writing in general is something that I use to express myself. And that also goes for any artistic outlet. I'm someone who needs to expel energy before I have it build up inside of me. So I also do that through running. I do that through communicating with people in general. I always try and surround myself with good people. So anything where I don't have to be kind of like in my own head really works for me when it comes to self-care.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And certainly a couple of those things that you shared, I believe in all of them, but a couple of them that we've done through the Dignity project and our free mobile game Shadow's Edge is that we strongly feel expressive writing is important and also artistic expression. And that's why in our game, we have a journal writing component, and it's fun and cool way to do journal writing. It's not, because some people can't stare at that white piece of paper and have those feelings pour out. So it's a fun and interactive and creative way. And the creative way is, instead of feeling like, gee, I have to be an artist, I'm going to get all these art materials and sit down and create something. It's actually, we give the tools in the game to make graffiti, and that's our artistic expression. And then from your journal writing, you can find those aha moments and put some words like on a wall, just as if you were doing graffiti. And so it's a fun way to do that very same thing that you're talking about. So we hope that that other young people feel the way you do, that creative expression is a powerful way to get in touch with yourself and to get those feelings that are bottled up out. So thanks for sharing. Okay, next up we have Dr. Khasho. And so Ramsey, I have a few questions for you. And one is, I think that the teenage years, everybody would say that it's a moody period, and oh, they're just being a moody teen. And I know that often it's discounted, and it can be much more serious than what they're showing on the outside, or what we believe is really going on. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on the difference between the blues and depression, and the difference between, say, mood swings, and when people should be concerned about bipolar disorder or some of the other clinical diagnoses that they've heard of. What are normal fears? When should they be concerned about anxiety? Could you let us know what you think about that?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. I always first like to start out by talking, I do believe that teens get a bad rap in terms of their moodiness. And I often tell parents and other adults that it's really important to look at teens through a developmental lens. So developmentally, teens are going through a lot of changes. They're going through puberty. There's a lot of physiological changes happening, body changes. And then they're going through a lot of social emotional changes. There's a psychological experience that they're having. One of the biggest tasks during the teen years is gaining identity, trying to understand who they are. And that requires this task of individuating, or kind of pulling away from their family of origin in order to discover who they are. And there's oftentimes this sort of push-pull that happens with family systems and adults. And with all the physiological changes going on, that just creates this sort of perfect storm in what we see in teens in terms of the moodiness and irritability that sometimes comes up. And I often, I tell parents that it's important to view teens through that lens, because it helps you better understand and not personalize some of the experiences that teens are having. So with that being said, the sort of moodiness and irritability, and one day wanting to be close to parents and the next day kind of hating parents is absolutely developmentally appropriate. When it crosses the threshold and when we get concerned is a couple of things. When it becomes really acute, so something severe happens. So if teens are moving towards self-harming behaviors or having suicidal thoughts, those are the very easy red flags to see. When the sadness or anxiety is very chronic and unrelenting, that's when it becomes a problem. just from a pure mental health perspective, we all experience anxiety and depression, and we say that it moves into a mental health issue when it begins to interfere with daily activities of living. So when it starts interfering with family, when it starts interfering with ability to function at school or at work for teens who are working, that's when it becomes a problem. So the things that we look for are, difficulty concentrating, challenges with sleep, either sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in eating habits, eating too much or eating too little, feeling sad or down or depressed more days than not are just some of the things that we look for. The other real quick thing that I wanted to say about teens, particularly related to depression, is that oftentimes depression manifests itself as irritability versus sadness. And so that's something that we kind of have to keep our eye on as well.
Wow, you bring up so many important points, because I think as a parent of teen and preteen myself, I mean, it is confusing when you see one thing on the outside, which you're showing, like what you just said about irritability.
Yeah.
But it's what are they really feeling on the inside? And some very simple ways to identify whether or not you should start considering seeking professional help. So thank you so much on that.
Sure.
So why don't you talk to us a little bit about, say they are at that point where they want to see a professional. What's the process like about getting a diagnosis and starting treatment? Could you shed some light on that?
Yeah. So, I think long are the days where parents need to seek out help when there is something severe going on. We are really at a place, and I hope with a lot of the raising awareness around mental health and what you're doing, Sherry, the work that you're doing through Shadows Edge, et cetera, is helping to sort of decrease the stigma. And so, I think parents are in a position now to reach out and consult a provider anytime they have a concern. They don't need to be sure or certain that it is depression or anxiety versus typical teen irritability or moodiness. It's always good to reach out to a professional and just ask and consult. There are a lot of amazing providers out there who work with kids and teens. I definitely recommend finding specialists who specialize in working with kids and teens versus utilizing an adult provider. And the process is pretty straightforward. If it's, if you're dealing with sort of anxiety and depression, that can really easily be assessed and addressed and treated by a psychologist or a master's level therapist who can determine if there's something clinical going on without a lot of testing, and then come up with a treatment plan collaboratively with the teen and the family to determine what treatment is needed, and then actually carry out the treatment itself to help provide young people with the ability to talk about what's going on emotionally, and then also help them find ways to cope with some of the challenges that they're experiencing. If there are more significant issues like questions about ADHD or a learning difference, we sometimes make the recommendation to do psychological testing that will help us determine diagnostically what's going on before we actually make a recommendation for treatment, or even concurrently.
Well, I really appreciate what you say, and I think it resonates with all the panelists, that any time that they're concerned is a valid reason to reach out for help.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that your child has something. It just means you need more information.
Absolutely.
And I think that that's so important to get that information, to get that education. And even if it's a rule out from your own mental health, that's important, I think, for a parent. So when parents are looking to find the right agency, the right therapist, are there certain questions that they should be thinking about asking? How do they find these referrals? How do they know once they're at a particular agency, who would be the right person for them to see?
Word of mouth and talking to trusted parents. A lot of parents speak to other sort of peer parents who have kids who've struggled and have had good or bad experiences with certain providers. It's always good if you know someone who can vouch for a certain provider. Parents have a really good gut intuition around providers. And so I really encourage parents to call providers. One thing that we do at CHC is we have these free 30-minute consultations where you can consult with a mental health professional. We also allow parents the opportunity, and we encourage all parents to speak with the provider, have a 15-minute phone conversation, ask questions about, their clinical approach, what their experience is in working with kids and teens. And there's again, a gut intuition that parents have that I always tell parents to listen to. It's that you get a feel over the phone or in person when you talk to a provider, and you can assess whether you believe they would be a good fit for your teens. But there are a number of questions that you can ask, but that gut is really, really important too.
We bring up a great point. I mean, I know as a parent, I would always, I make my list of questions before I see any type of doctor, whether it's a medical doctor or a psychologist, because it puts me in that feeling of control. Like, I want to know this, and hopefully I can get it. Is there ever too many questions a parent can answer or ask before they get irritating to you professionals?
Not really. Again, families are consumers of services, and they should have the rights to ask any questions that they have. Asking about degrees and asking about theoretical approach. Parents, another recommendation for parents is there's a bunch of literature and research that suggests that there are certain treatments that are evidence-based, which means the literature shows that it works. And so you would want to ask providers if they provide evidence-based treatments and what treatments those are. But absolutely, I think parents should be, they have the right to ask all sorts of questions that help them feel comfortable with the provider.
Good. Hear that, parents? So feel free to make sure you know what you're getting when you get into the professional realm. So thanks on that. And then once you choose a therapist, could you say something about the treatment itself? I mean, what is the therapeutic process? What can families expect when they start?
Yeah. So absolutely. It all starts with a very thorough intake process. So oftentimes clinicians spend about an hour, hour and a half gathering information. It's a data download with the teens, with parents, to gather information about what's going on, what are the challenges, what are the treatments that have been tried before, developmental history, et cetera. We need that information to help us wrap our heads clinically around what's going on. And that helps to inform us professionally around what are the recommendations moving forward. And then it requires a very collaborative conversation between the provider and the teen and the provider and the parents to talk about what the recommendations are, perhaps what some of the diagnostic impressions are, and then working collaboratively. And I'm emphasizing the word collaboratively because we are no longer, as has been done historically, a top-down type of treatment. We're no longer the days where the therapist says, this is what happens, and we do it without engaging the teen and family. So that engagement and collaboration is critical in terms of what treatment looks like. And then coming up with a treatment plan is really important. Coming up with goals. What are the 2 or 3 things that as a teen, as a family, we're going to be working on? And how do we know we're going to be successful in 3 months or 6 months? And documenting that and checking in on that pretty regularly. And then that's where the treatment starts. Oftentimes the first several sessions are done really building rapport. That therapeutic relationship and trust is really critical, particularly with teens, establishing that rapport, because you can't do good work with young people unless you have a good, solid working relationship. And then you go into the sort of formal treatment part of things where you really are teaching teens the skills and the tools that they need to cope with some of the difficult mental health challenges that they're having. And then there's always sort of closing the loop on it, really getting back with teens and their parents to find out if the treatment is moving, if the teen is feeling some symptom relief, the family is seeing progress, et cetera, and then adjusting treatment accordingly.
Oh, thank you. Those insights are incredible, Dr. Khasho. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share them with us this morning. Absolutely. And next we're going to turn to Dr. Dale Larson, who was my professor at Santa Clara University. So thank you for joining us today, Dale. And I'm wondering, I first learned when I was a student at Santa Clara about emotional healing. And I am wondering if you could tell us what that is exactly and a little bit about the process to get there.
Yeah, it's really an honor to be part of this program. I really enjoyed what Ramsey was sharing about treatment and just the need to overcome the stigma and to reach out for help. And I think what Lena was sharing also, the struggle she had in overcoming that. And that's one of my research areas is self-concealment, how that can interfere with us reaching out for help and causing all kinds of problems along the way. But emotions are so central. I think Ramsey was sort of underlining that in treatment and in how we deal with these kinds of issues. And I want to make a pitch for emotions, because I think emotions, what we found in all the research and all our clinical work, is that emotions are at the core of psychological healing and transformation. They're really at the core. And we tend to not think about them as a resource. We tend to think of them as something we have to manage. We have to control our emotions. And I think Ramsey got at that a little bit with the Sturm und Drang of the adolescent, or maybe, Sherry, you were saying that no, but these emotions are real. And what we have to do is develop a more positive relationship with emotions as parents, professionals, and as teens. And Dick Lazarus was my teacher at Berkeley, and Dick was one of the foremost stress theorists, and he wrote a beautiful book on emotions and adaptation. And what he always argued was, emotions have the wisdom of the ages. They're there for a reason. They're there to guide us, whether we're dealing with grief and loss, where I think they have incredible adaptive value, but in everyday situations. We have a saying in therapy, name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. That we need to. And here's the basic idea. We need to go beyond this kind of global distress. Depression is not an emotion. It's a mixture of things. It's anxiety and worry and all kinds of other things, some sadness also, and other things mixed together. But if we can get beyond this kind of global distress that we have, and we call it emotional differentiation, which is getting down to more of a deeper understanding of what this emotion is telling us, because every emotion has a need associated with it, and every need has an action. This is the role they play in our lives. So emotions can guide us, and the action might be, for example, if you feel lonely, I need to reach out, I need to get help, I need to make a connection. Our emotions guide us, and that's one of the key findings that we found in the literature and in our clinical work over time. Jamie Pennebaker, and this relates to Sherry's work with Digging Deep, and has found in a whole series of studies that writing about, and that was one of the things that Lena was emphasizing that was helpful for her, journaling, expressing our emotions in that kind of fashion, just writing about them. The studies are amazing. You write for 15 minutes over 4 days, and you see improved immunological functioning, you see improved schoolwork, you see less absenteeism at work with adults. It's really quite remarkable. Just expressing these things makes a big difference. Now, doing it in the presence of a confidant or a counselor can even be more powerful. So we know that you have to have a confidant to be expressing these things, with another person, someone you can really trust. But anyhow, accessing these emotions and learning from them, I think, is key when we're talking about emotional transformation and emotional healing. Sherry, if that's what you're really getting at. I think it's finding a way to approach them and learn from them instead of trying to suppress them. Suppression does not work. Suppression just creates a kind of we call an ironic rebound. It just keeps coming up, and we keep pushing it down. We have to open up to our feelings and then learn from them, because they have wisdom in them. That's kind of my take
I
on
think
it.
that is the best description of emotional healing and the role of emotions in our lives that I have ever heard. And I'm going to be getting right back to you to write a blog about it on our Digging Deep resources.
I feel good about
blog that we do for parents and professionals. Emotions as a resource. Never heard those words put together. And I love it. I'm just wondering, Lena, do you have does that resonate with you at all? That emotions could actually be a resource and not something to just control? Oops.
Yeah, I think I journal a lot of my emotions, which, as I've said, and not only is that a fantastic way to get my emotions out, but it's also a fantastic way to reflect on them. So going back and kind of analyzing, like, why was I feeling this way? and maybe what can I do to move forward with that emotion, because you have an emotion and then you have a behavior.
Right.
And if you're looking to change a behavior, you've got to know where it comes from.
There you go.
Yep,
That's it. You're doing it. You're doing it right there. Yeah.
So what Dale said then about that, it kind of, an emotion is there to show us what we need. I also love that, what you said. Does that resonate with you? It to guide.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Let's see, where are we? So the next thing I'd like to talk about is resilience. I know you know a lot about resilience, Dale, and I'm just curious, is that something that we're born with, or is that something we can actually develop over time?
Well, a lot of times resilience is not understood very well. Resilience is an outcome. Now, we know if someone's resilient if they've managed psychologically challenging situations or life challenges or health challenges. Very often a health issue, a health problem can be an agent that stirs resilience. So we know that. We know that we have achievement despite adversity in teens, for example. You have it in children as well, and in adults also. So these challenges we have in life can stir resilience. They can be an agent for resilience. So resilience is an outcome, and what's really exciting that we know now that there are a number of things that can be resilience enhancing, that can enhance in our resilience. And these are the different strategies and coping efforts that we can make, and strengthening things we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, as we go along, and that have already been illustrated in various ways. The social support is a tremendous resilience enhancer. So generally, there are some personality elements that figure in. Some people are a little bit more able to communicate, and that helps. But if you're going to predict resilience, you're not going to look necessarily at the personality. You're going to look at these other factors in the environment and in the kinds of strategies that people have along the way to predict the outcomes. And so that's a point that sometimes people don't really quite get, that we don't look, are you resilient or are you not resilient? Is my child resilient or is my child not resilient? Yeah, there are some differences, but basically, we need to work on the resilience enhancing factors, like the things that Annie's doing and Ramsey's doing in their organizations, and that Lena accessed, that really made a difference in terms of strengthening her resilience. So that's a long-winded response.
No, it's great. And I'd actually like to go into a bit more detail about one of the ones that you mentioned, which is the social support and the community that we build around us. And I'm wondering if you could say something about social support and how does that affect our ability to heal emotionally, maybe even any suggestions that you have about how we could build up just that one. There's many factors, like you said, that build resilience, but that's one that we all can do.
Well, after 100 years of psychotherapy and studying social support is one of the best predictors of almost every outcome in psychology. It's across the board. And of course, counseling is just a refined kind of social support. Yes, there's a lot more to it, but it is profoundly an instance of social support. And we know from all the psychotherapy research talking about psychotherapy is that it's the relationship that heals. It's not the specific technique that we use. So we've evolved to develop, maintain, restore our emotional well-being through human connection. I think that's one of the things right now with the COVID crisis we're all struggling with. We all are having a feeling needing to reach out. And especially if you're a distressed teen right now, what do? You're cut off from your peers, which is where you really feel like you want to be. You probably don't want to be with your parents, although you love them, you want to be with them, but you're really ready to be with, I don't know if Lena could address that, but you're ready to be with your peers and be launching. And here we are now all quarantined at home, with our families and sometimes too close quarters. But the need for human connection is so profound, and it is the healing force in us as a species. And it's ancestral plane behavior. When we have something that's distressing, we have that urge to share it with another human being, and things can get in the way, like Lena was talking about the difficulty talking about something and overcoming. And Lena, not to presume that it was a shameful experience, but I think that's what we all have. Whenever we have anything that we feel others will be judgmental of, that's, I don't want to tell them for whatever reason. It could be anything. We all have this in our lives. You tend to not disclose and to not reach out. And then that leads to more problems because we get caught up in it. And as Lena was kind of sharing, kind of caught up in your own thoughts and ruminating. And that is all not paying attention in a constructive way to our emotions. And those are best addressed through communicating with another human being, and also through expressing them, Sherry, and like digging deep. I think that has tremendous healing potential, because once you get it outside of yourself, you can look at it. While it's still in that echo chamber, you're not really able to process it very well, because you think, like, I alone have this issue, fallacy of uniqueness, and you get stuck with, actually you're avoiding your experience paradoxically, while worry is a way to avoid our experiencing, which is something most people don't think about. Rumination and worry are not actually experiencing our experience. They're avoidance, is experiential avoidance. I'm getting into abstract academic stuff,
I think
research stuff. But
a very important thing that you said, Dale, though, that really resonates with me, is to have this community around us. It has to do with that self-expressive side, because if we don't put ourselves out there, how on earth are people going to know how to relate to us? I mean, I remember that was the most important thing I learned when I was going through my own personal process after having had a brain tumor. I got so frustrated that nobody seemed to get what was going on for me. And somebody, one of the leaders, one of the support groups I went, asked me the simple question, well, have you told anybody? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, no wonder they don't know what to do, because then they'll just do things from their own perspective. They'll make an assumption of what would feel good to them, which may not be what feels good to you. So it ties both the importance of self-expression, but the importance of community together by making that branch that it's our responsibility to put ourselves out there.
Yeah,
it's one
of the most incredible things, I think, is that when we have something that is like any kind of issue, like we're actually traumatized, or we have an illness, that there's shame involved. There should be no shame, but we all feel that way in a way. And shame is the glue that keeps things hidden. It's what keeps things hidden. And why do we have shame if we have cancer? Why do we have shame if it doesn't really make sense on the surface? But that's somehow how it often plays out, and we have to help people overcome that. And I think I think, Sherry, that's a lot of what everyone here, Ramsey and Annie and you, are all trying to make happen, is to overcome that reluctance to share. And once we do, good things start to happen. We get empathy, we get support, we're able to access these incredible resources that people here are providing.
Well, in fact, one of the reasons in Shadow's Edge that we chose graffiti as a metaphor is because what is graffiti about? It's about that artist having something to say that needs to be heard and splatting themselves out there, for onlookers to go by and see. And one of the things that I realized is that young people and people in general, they don't do that. They don't put themselves out there in a way that people can see. Mm-hmm. So that's why we chose graffiti as a metaphor, to, in a very literal way, put yourself out there so that somebody can relate to you. So I really want to turn now to Annie Kim, the managing director of SafeSpace, to really tell us about the nuts and bolts. We've talked a lot about what people need, how to get started. And I know that you have a ton of experience on how to involve parents in the process. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure, sure. So family caregivers, first and foremost, I think oftentimes, you know, initially kind of go in a stage of like denial, not knowing whether or not their child is really going through something. And I think something that was really importantly brought up by Dr. Khasho was it doesn't matter where in the phase, if you feel it, then please address it and, asking for help. And I think also first and foremost for parents to involve that conversation with their son and daughter directly and, asking them because this is about their journey and their own self-care and for families to also put value on their own experience as that family caregiver, because quite honestly, nobody knows your son and daughter better than you do. And so, to really make sure that you hold on to that and value yourself. And, should it get to the point of seeking treatment, sharing everything that you have been through with your loved one, with your son and daughter equally. Collaboration was heavily discussed as well, that each person should equally collaborate and bring information to treatment planning when it involves their son and daughter. So absolutely hearing the voice from the teen, hearing the voice from the family caregivers, because they're the ones who are supporting their child 24/7, as well as the professional lens.
So we spoke before our webinar today about this three-legged stool. Is that what you're talking about, or is there something else?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. A stool cannot stand and function if one of the legs are missing. And so everybody brings a very important experience, perspective, and their own way of supporting the individual who needs that help.
Thank you. And another kind of nuts and bolts thing, but I think is essential to understand, is there a time when a referral to a mental health professional is mandatory?
Are you referring to a 5150?
Yeah, that would be a perfect example. Can you explain that to people who may not know what that is?
5150, for those of you who don't know that term, is a welfare institution code. It's also known as an involuntary hold, oftentimes as a last resort and when safety is compromised. So when somebody meets one of the three criteria, which is danger to self, danger to others, or grave disability, then that's usually when law enforcement or healthcare professionals will call for a 5150, which is an involuntary hold. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions about the 5150 is that it is that the individual will be held for 72 hours. That is not the case. It is up to 72 hours. And I think that's a very important piece to recognize, because I've had numerous times in the past where families have panicked and said, I thought my son or daughter was going to be in the hospital for a minimum of 72 hours, but that is not the case. And, really, I feel that as families, as a family unit, if we were to be more responsive versus reactive, then a lot of times we can minimize having to go that route, because it's very traumatic. It's traumatic for the individual who has to go in involuntarily because your rights are taken away. And also it's very difficult for families to even initiate that, because nobody wants to call, a 5150, have to call 911 on their son or daughter. But if safety is compromised, then that should never be, you should never hesitate, especially if someone is showing signs of hurting themselves or others.
Thanks. That's so important. Are there people in the community, for example, teachers, other medical professionals, that if they see signs, like you said, danger of self to others, where they would need to make the call and not the parents?
Yes, that does happen on campuses. Sometimes when a young teen goes in to speak with a counselor, their intention may not be to share everything, but in that process of sharing and feeling, comfortable, they may end up sharing that they have had, whether it's suicidal ideations or have had an attempt, or, where it's a constant, thought of wanting to hurt themselves or proceed. And so at that time, then as a counselor or as an adult, oftentimes you are faced with having to make that difficult decision. If you ever at any moment feel that somebody will follow through, the best thing to do is to get help right away.
And that's so important. It's the safety. It's not something to be mean or judgmental.
No.
It's safety.
It's safety. And I think another thing that a lot of people don't understand is that, if you were to go in voluntarily and to go and get, help and services, number one, it's not a sign of weakness. Number two, there's no way that other people can find out because all of that information is kept confidential. And I think that's another barrier as to why some people do not seek treatment, because they feel that, oh, somebody can look up whether or not I've been hospitalized. And that is not the case. Every patient is protected by HIPAA, which is Health Information Portability Accountability Act, and confidentiality. A lot of families, I feel like, don't seek help for their teenagers because they think that colleges are going to find out about this and that this is going to be a sign of weakness. That is not the case at all. All of this information is kept very much confidential.
That's got to feel encouraging to our families that so much are just curious if professional help might help.
Yeah.
And they don't have to have fears around
Right.
that everyone on this call and everyone in this whole community is there to support the needs and help uncover the needs. Because
Right.
I think our teens are very good at putting on a good face.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a discovery process that happens. And part of that discovery process may be uncovering something deeper than you expected.
Right.
But it's nice to know that there is help out there in the community that can address that, and that we don't need to be scared to get
Right.
to that point.
There's
I'm curious, are there any roadblocks that would completely stop other than stigma we've discussed, misunderstanding, maybe about confidentiality, could be another. Are there other things that stop parents from seeking the help that they need, or kids from receiving the treatment that they need?
I think that, there's just a lot of fear of having to admit that somebody needs that help. I think that's the first initial, struggle. And for families, I think from a caregiver perspective, something that I've heard for over a decade has been, oh, I can take care of it. I can fix this. And for parents to have to admit that, sometimes we need to actually consult an expert in this, and that, you may actually be a contributing factor as to why some things are going the way that they are. And that's actually a very hard thing for families to hear and to also accept. But other gaps may be insurance, whether or not you have direct line to calling your insurance company and getting a referral directly to a therapist and a psychologist or psychiatrist. If you are a part of a county system, there's an actual delay in terms of getting services. If you're on Medi-Cal, Medicaid, a lot of those factors. We've even worked with communities in the past of, are you, in terms of residency status, immigration, the fear of whether or not you will be reported. There's so many different factors as to why people have these obstacles, as well as maybe religion. We've seen that also play into why people don't seek services sooner. They feel that they could, consult their local pastor, priest, whoever, and, maybe that they could actually heal themselves. There's so many different factors into why people don't receive treatment right away. But I think when people start to actually get help, talk about it, both for teens as well as for the families, there's peer groups. There's peer groups for teens, there's peer groups as well as for family caregivers, really seeking that support. And, I always like to say support groups is the one area where you don't have to explain, justify, or reason. You are in a room full of people that absolutely get it. They get it because they live it every day. And so when you get that help and you realize, my goodness, I'm not the only mother that's going through this, or wow, I'm not the only 16-year-old who actually has these repetitive thoughts, that there's that validation. And so I think when people start to really feel that they're not alone, that's when they start to feel that empowerment. And, once we start talking about it more, then I think more people are inclined to get that help.
And it also opens up, I think, that ability to connect with people at a deeper level than you have in your regular life, let's say, and it gives us a chance to be empathetic too. Maybe we don't have the exact same experience, but we feel less alone because we can relate to their experience because we've had something similar.
Absolutely.
And even if we can't exactly understand it, we can listen in a different way than we have to other people before. And I think empathy in itself, getting back to what Dale was talking about emotional healing.
Yeah.
I think when somebody feels like they can be there for another person,
Right.
and to be empathetic for that other person, that in itself can be healing, even if you're not discussing your own issues. To listen to others and be that support to others, I think is so critically important.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if we can just turn now to see if there's any pressing questions. Our team on the, I don't know if they can look quickly on that. If not, I think we have some time to briefly talk about, first let me ask everyone on this panel, was there anything you wanted to say to anybody else on the panel first? And then we'll turn to talking a little bit about COVID and how some of the things we talked about today can relate. But do you guys have anything to say to each other?
Well, I just wanted to thank Lena for sharing your story. Adults really need to listen more to teens and their voice and their, as Dale was saying, their emotions and their needs. And we need to be more responsive to teens. So thank you, Lena, for sharing your story. And I hope a lot of the adults listening heard.
Yeah, of course. If I can help anyone by sharing my own story, I think that's such a powerful thing within itself. And that's why I'm here today.
You're the real expert.
Yeah, like we call this an expert panel, right? But we all know who the expert is here. So thank you for sharing that. So let's switch and talk a little bit about COVID, because certainly that's something that's on everyone's mind right now. And I'm just wondering, Lena, amongst your peers, how has COVID been affecting you personally or your peers? What have you been seeing?
So I've first of all been seeing a lot of change and shifting happen, especially when we first started the whole quarantine about 2 months ago. So being part of the senior class, my senior festivities kind of came to an abrupt end. And that was my friends at my own school and just everyone. So there was a little bit of disappointment within that, but we're trying to make the most of the situation that we have. So if we're pretty good at sticking together, we've been in school with each other for 4 years. So we're here to support each other. For me personally, there was a bit of a shift in mental health treatment, because not only is this a stressful situation for everyone, but you literally have to shift your treatment. So like there was about a week and a half period where I didn't see my therapist like fully in session, because she was figuring out how to convert to teletherapy, because I can't go in her office anymore. And I think that's a common thing for a lot of providers, whether or not you had the teletherapy or the telehealth care set up already. It's just a totally different feeling. But I'm entirely grateful that I'm still able to receive care. So, through all of this, I think everyone's trying to make the most of what we've got, despite it being really difficult.
Yeah, so that is for sure. And I think that a lot of the mental health agencies out there are doing things to pivot and be able to offer, like you said, we're all getting used to actually having conversations. And to me, it's almost like real life to have these Zoom conversations. And Ramsey, I'd love you to say what Children's Health Council has been doing in the area of telemedicine and what you're seeing that's maybe the same or different for the types of things that are coming in the front door to your agency.
It's a great question. We were lucky at Children's Health Council in that, we've been prepping for a year. Telehealth was sort of the up and coming new format for providing counseling services for many reasons. And so we were preparing, and the COVID crisis really just helped propel us to do it much more quickly. But we were well prepared when we moved the majority of our services to telehealth, including our intensive outpatient program, which we historically wouldn't have thought to do because we work with high-risk teens, but it's actually worked out quite well. And one of the things that we're seeing, surprisingly, is that a lot of people are really valuing it and in many ways preferring it to in-person care for a lot of reasons. It's convenient for families to not have to drive in Bay Area traffic. They can just, the therapist just kind of wires into their living room to have that conversation or some private place. And so the convenience is great. What the research shows us is that telehealth is just as effective as in-person therapy. The other advantage is we're able at CHC, and I know other providers are experiencing this, we're able to reach people who we otherwise would not have been able to reach in in-person care. So, you know, we have families who we've been reaching from the Central Valley, for example, who can't access services, and we can provide the care through telehealth because of the format of telehealth. So there are some really great advantages of telehealth for sure.
And I think that whole point of access that you bring up is so critical. I mean, I think one of the barriers, let's say, of young people getting the help that they need is because they can't access it, because it's too expensive, they can't get insurance, or they can't get there, or they just don't have the time, or their parents can't go if it's family therapy, or whatever the situation is. I think access is critical. And I'm wondering, Lena, if you've had anything, your journal writing would be one thing that you can do on your own that doesn't require that access. No money's involved, you don't have to drive anywhere. Are there other things like books that you've read that you might be able to recommend, or other things that are free and easy to do for people?
Yeah, along with journaling, I think the books, like you said, so I'm part of the SafeSpace Youth Advisory Board with Annie, and we, about maybe a month ago, just started a book club. And it's been fantastic. Our first book that we read is called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. Yeah, fantastic book. I highly recommend. It's not only do you get insight on a psychologist's world, but she's just got a ton of knowledge to share. So it's a very insightful book to read, as well as a very relatable one. And then also to have that conversation with my friends and with Annie as well. Other ways, the journaling, kind of stepping up my self-care routine. I've been making sure to reach out to a lot of my friends more often, just kind of like call them over FaceTime, or maybe go for a walk 6 feet apart. Just anything to kind of keep in contact and maintain, you know, it's, yes, we have social distancing, but that doesn't mean cut off all social connections. Still kind of be there for yourself and for everyone else.
And I just love to end on something positive. You couldn't have said that any better. That one of the points of that book, you should talk to somebody, isn't that you should talk to a therapist and you better go to a therapist's office. It's like, just talk to someone, you know, whether your friends or, you know, even if it's through Zoom or even if it's 6 feet apart, just talk to someone. And I'd like to end there and thank you very much for my guests for participating today. And thank you for all tuning in, everyone. And we'll see you at our next webinar for the Dignity Project. Thank you.